A huge colony of bees was living under this backyard playground equipment, and I was called to remove them. The bees had been living here for a long time, and the colony looked very active. The bees were using these holes in the rotted out floor of the equipment as the entrance to their hive, and so that's exactly where I decided to set up the new hive to move them into. So I gave the bees some smoke, and I started to make a plan to access the hive. I noticed that some of the boards were sticking up just ever so slightly higher than the rest, and they looked pretty loose. So I grabbed one, and to my surprise, it lifted right up. I wasn't really expecting it to come up so easily, so I took a moment to figure out my next step. I had spent some time beforehand observing the colony's behavior, and I didn't think that they would be defensive, but these bees were even calmer than I expected. So I took the lid off the new hive, then I gave the bees some smoke. I thought the smoke would make them go back to their original hive, but many of the bees went to the new hive instead. And while it looked like the bees were starting to go into the new hive, and some of them were, a lot of them were just going in to investigate, and they were turning around and going right back out. I needed to get some brood, some bees, or better yet the queen into the new hive before the colony would start to move in on their own. So I smoked the bees on the next board, and it also came up very easily. But this time I had the new hive ready to go, and I had a plan. So I took the board and I rested it on the side of the new hive. Then I gave it a few gentle taps, and the bees fell right in. Then I set the board aside, and I couldn't wait to uncover the rest of the hive, so I carefully lifted up the next board, and this one had even more bees on it. And because I wanted to get as many bees as I could into the new hive as quickly as possible, again I just shook these bees off the board and into the new hive. Then I scraped a large piece of comb off the board and into the new hive, and I set the board aside. I had removed enough of the boards by now that I could almost see the entire hive. It was absolutely beautiful, and the colony was very busy, so I gave the bees some smoke, and I was excited to get to work. I smoked the hive where I was going to start working first, just to move the bees off the comb. Then I pulled up the first piece of comb, and it was full of baby bees, which was a good sign of a healthy colony. The bees were also very docile, and they were not trying to sting me at all. So I put the comb into a frame, and I put everything into the new hive. Each piece of comb seemed bigger than the last, and they were all full of baby bees and a lot of pollen. So I put each piece into a wooden frame, and I secured it with rubber bands, and I put everything into the new hive. Then I just kept working my way through the hive and pulling up comb after comb. Each piece had a unique and beautiful brood pattern on it, and it looked like this colony had a very healthy queen. So with every piece of comb I pulled up, I was looking for the queen. If I didn't see her, I would cut the comb into pieces so that it would fit into the frames of the new hive. Then I would put everything I took out of the original hive right into the new hive for the bees. These pieces of comb held pollen, nectar, and baby bees, and giving everything back to the bees gives them the best chance for survival. And you can see that the new hive was already becoming quite popular with the bees, but they weren't really rushing to get in yet, so I didn't think that the queen had snuck in there without me noticing. So I just kept pulling up piece after piece of comb and searching for the queen. And this colony of bees was so large that I had to add another box to the new hive. Then I just kept removing comb from the original hive. The pieces were getting larger and larger, and this one had a really beautiful brood pattern on it that looked like a bullseye, which was a great sign of a strong queen. And because these pieces were so large, I often had to cut through the comb to make it to fit into the frames of the new hive. I always hate causing any damage to what the bees have built, and I always try to cut as little as possible. But I know that the bees will repair everything in no time and be better off in the end, so I just kept working as carefully as possible to put all the pieces of comb into the frames. Then I secured everything together with rubber bands and I put it all into the new hive for the bees. I was over halfway done removing the hive at this point, but I had still not yet found the queen. So I just kept removing these incredible pieces of comb and searching for her. I wanted to find this queen not only because that's the key to any successful bee removal, but also because this hive was full of so much brood that meant that the queen was probably very strong and healthy. And I wanted this queen's genetics to be able to survive, and I was looking forward to caring for this great colony of bees as long as they needed me. I had been working for about an hour by this point, and I was nearly at the end of the hive. As I pulled out the last pieces of comb, I didn't see the queen, but I felt confident that she was not yet in the new hive because the bees weren't rushing to get in there. Now that I was done removing the comb, I could focus on getting the bees into the new hive and finding the queen. But since so many bees were already gravitating towards the new hive, I wanted to give them some time to see if they would move in naturally. So I started to clean up all of the pieces of comb that I left behind when I first opened the hive. I scraped these pieces onto the new hive, but then I put them into a bucket of other small pieces that would be offered to all of my bees at home. Then I gave the bees some smoke to encourage them to move out of the playground equipment and into the new hive. I was also hoping that the smoke would cause the bees to move around and give me clues to where the queen was. So I took a long break now to focus on searching for the queen. I knew that if I searched long enough I would find her since there weren't that many places to hide anymore. And all of a sudden I saw her crawling on the boards of the playground equipment. She was a large and gorgeous queen, and her markings were really striking. I was so relieved to find her, so I put her in a clip and I put her in the new hive. Then it was time to get the bees into the new hive, so I started scooping them up with my hands. These bees were not trying to sting me at all, and I wanted to get as many bees as I could into the new hive as gently but as quickly as possible, so that the majority of the colony would guide the rest of the bees out of the playground equipment and into the new hive. And after a few handfuls of bees, that's exactly what happened, and all of the bees started rushing to get into the new hive to be with their queen. So I gave the bees some smoke to help guide them in the right direction. Then I just waited and watched as the entire colony settled into the new hive. After about 15 minutes or so, most of the colony was in the new hive and there was no longer a rush of bees trying to get inside. So I waited a while longer, but the sun was setting quickly, so I put the lid on the new hive. Then I smoked the original hive one last time, and I made a plan to get the bees into my truck. I slowly lifted the hive the best I could, and it was quite heavy, but I was able to get the hive safely into my cart. Then I wheeled the hive in the cart through the backyard and to my truck. Then I loaded the bees into my truck, and I took them home, and it was another great day of saving the bees.